The elves, as they appear throughout ancient mythology, were originally thought of as more or less human-sized creatures, but more powerful than humans. A lot like the Irish tradition of the Tuatha De Danann, the great fairy folk of Ireland who had been great warriors.
The elves demand respect in the ancient legends and the ancient myths. They're much wiser than human beings.
But ultimately, starting around 1600, people just stopped taking them seriously. Shakespeare was writing things like A Midsummer Night's Dream, and from that point on, we see the elves diminishing down into little fairies, dancing among the flowers. This more or less reached its peak with works like Peter Pan from very early 20th century literature.
You think Tinker Bell, little flimsy creature with wings. Well, this was the Victorian and Edwardian age in which Tolkien grew up. There was a whole school of fairy painting, which was immensely popular right up to the First World War. But Tolkien, as he read his way more and more into ancient literature, he thought that the whole idea of elves and of fairies had been diminished and downgraded. And I think that really bugged Tolkien, and he wanted to go back to what he saw of as a nobler conception.
Tolkien's elves were an amalgamation of all of the reading and research that Tolkien had done and all of his knowledge and love for ancient myth and legend.
He's a kind of mythic Sherlock Holmes who can put the clues together in a way that nobody else ever has. For instance, there's the Old Norse fragments about what kind of elves there are. It says there are Ljósalfar, light elves, and Dökkalfar, which are dark elves. Well, this caused immense confusion to many scholars. So Tolkien's brilliant solution to this was to say, all right, let's stop thinking about what color the elves are. The real difference is there are elves who've seen the light and elves who have not seen the light and remained in darkness. And in this case, the light is the light in Valinor, the undying lands. Some elves, like Galadriel, went all the way to Valinor, and they are the high elves. They grew steadily wiser and more powerful. But others never got past Mirkwood. They stayed in what was then Greenwood the Great, and those are the wood elves.
The way Tolkien kind of describes them is as less noble and wise in body and in spirit.
The feasting people were wood elves, of course. They differed from the high elves of the West and were more dangerous and less wise.
It was actually quite fun to finally get to the woodland elves and to be able to show a slightly more earthy race of elves, the Sylvan elves.
You know, you're reading the book, and I think my enduring memory of the Sylvan elves from the book, bit that I couldn't believe was they got drunk.
There stood barrels and barrels and barrels, for the wood elves, and especially their king, were very fond of wine.
Say what you like about our ill-tempered king, but he has excellent taste in wine.
They are, I guess you would say, a lesser race in a way. Perhaps not as high in culture and art and music, and yet in love with this world, invested in the little streams and the great trees.
In the book, The Hobbit, the Sylvan elves are almost faceless. There's no personality to hang on to. But that doesn't work for a film, of course. It never will. You have to bring character, because how does an audience care about them? And that was the pivotal role that Tauriel played.
We needed to show you what a Sylvan elf might be, but first and foremost, quite honestly, we created the character of Tauriel because we're going to have 13 old dwarves with long beards. We have Gandalf, of course, Bilbo. We've got Legolas, Thranduil, and we have Bard. You really feel the weight of that. It becomes a very blokey story quite quickly.
These stories really do lack female characters, particularly The Hobbit.
There's no girls here. This is very blokes out here.
This could have been a fucking nightmare. That aspect of it. It could have been a nightmare because of the testosterone and because of the maleness flying around.
We did look at where the opportunities lay for creating a good, strong female character that could have her own story. And we looked at a few interesting places where that could happen. Could she be a hobbit?
We thought about the idea of female characters. We thought about somebody in Lake Town. I mean, we did consider different ideas way back at the beginning.
We didn't just want to create her for the sake of creating a female character. She needed to have a purpose in the storytelling. I think it was Fran who said, she should be an elf.
It just is an interesting idea because then we thought we could explore it, the idea of an elven female character who is not Galadriel. She's not the wise seer. Take it in directions that would be kind of fun as filmmakers.
Originally, her name in the audition scripts was Tauriel, which means starlight, but she needed to be more earthy. So we wrote down a whole bunch of names in Elvish and we sent them to David Salo. He does all our translations. And one of the names that we wrote down was Daughter of Mirkwood. So when it came back as Tauriel and he said it and you heard it, and it was just like, oh, that's it, forget about it, that's her name.
Tauriel may not literally exist in the books in the sense that her character is never described as we see her on screen, but there are definitely antecedents of her character in Tolkien.
People always say there are no female characters in Tolkien's stories, but of course you have the Lady Galadriel, who is the most powerful of them all in many ways. And he was never averse to female characters fighting. Look at the Lady Eowyn in Lord of the Rings. She was a warrior princess.
I am no man.
Examples that spring to my mind are Luthien. She rode straight into Morgoth, who was like the big bad version even of Sauron. Similarly, you've got Edril, who is Elrond's grandmother. Her sword is the sword that Arwen carries.
If you want him, come and claim him.
There's certainly nothing in the Tolkien kind of mythology that is sexist in the way that, you know, the elvish warriors are all blokes and the women stay home and cook. I mean, it's not like that. But at the same time, we didn't want Tauriel just to be Xena warrior princess. You know, she had to have more complexity and more interest.
Over the months, Tauriel's character evolved, and we did a lot of design work that involved the leaf mail. Very fortunately, I sit as a judge on this amazing event in New Zealand that happens every year called the World of Wearable Arts. And it was on stage I saw this dragon light woven out of leaf mail and fine chainmail costume that was so beautiful and so inspiring, created by a New Zealand artist called Eve Gilliland. So I approached her and asked her if she'd consider coming to the workshop and sharing it with us.
It has an amazing movement quality to it. You can see that it's just straight sticking to the form.
Yeah, no, it's
fantastic. The model looked amazing.
It's fantastically
I love
fitting.
this, where see that movement there with those little jewels?
Yeah, that's
and
terrific.
On stage,
that's
that looked
terrific.
incredible.
Yeah, that's almost the sort of movement that we want the elves and the trees to have, isn't it? That kind of unholy movement.
We then hired Eve, and she worked tirelessly for many, many months working with this technique. This is at a similar time that Nick was evolving his ideas, and so he started to bring Eve's design influence into his drawings.
So we wanted to try and incorporate that into the elf designs because they felt like they sat right with that culture. But ultimately we ended up pushing that scale mail idea as sort of Tauriel's more signature look.
Eve helped the team learn how to put these garments together to achieve this amazing body of work.
There's been a team of people doing this very, very fine embroidery and then putting this shifting colour underneath it. Peter described this to us as almost a kinetic fabric that when she moves, it moves with her, but when she comes to rest, it settles and comes to rest almost like he described it as a ninja assassin of the forest.
We got to shoot tests. We shot some of them in the back courtyard of our workshop. We had Kate Venables, one of our costumers, jumping around in this stuff.
It was in many ways the ideal solution because we were looking for a way to armor her without covering her in armor. And it allowed her to still have her feminine grace and her elven grace that was just so necessary to that character.
And then we started casting. In Tauriel's case, we needed her to be someone who could be brave enough to take on a character who is not actually part of the book. And you know, it's hard to find the right person who can do that. And we had met and known Evangeline previously, so she came to mind.
When I received a message that Fran Walsh and Peter Jackson were trying to get a hold of me, I was laid up in bed post-labor, unable to, I was bedridden. I couldn't get up on my own.
So Fran and I were both sitting there thinking, she's never gonna say yes. She's never gonna say yes. She's just got this baby.
The prospect of working at that point wasn't the most attractive thing in the world to me. But when I was asked to play an elf in The Hobbit, my favorite book of all time, I couldn't say no.
As soon as Evangeline was cast, she's got a very distinctive look. And once you've got the actress cast, it definitely informs the design process a lot more. Kind of makes it more concrete, and you kind of see what works and what doesn't a bit clearer.
When I arrived, the look that I was supposed to embody was depicted in a graphic sketch. I don't look like that graphic image that I came to see when I first arrived. I wish I did. I saw the graphic image and I went, oh, that's what you're gonna make me look like, that's amazing. And then they put the costume on me and I looked like a female dwarf.
Wow.
I mean, it didn't help that I was only 3.5 months post-pregnancy. I was so stocky. It was horrible. I didn't look elegant, I didn't look graceful, I didn't look elvish at all. I looked like a little dwarf.
It's not flowing in the way that it did in the drawing, for example, for whatever reason. Something that really was like liquid coming, that was always the hope, that it would have this kind of liquidy flow.
It didn't work, so he discarded it and started again.
So the head of wardrobe sat down and she made a design and she tried it on me and we knew we were on the right track.
Tauriel's costume incorporated 2 colorways of this tree bark fabric I got, and she had a coat of that green, and over the top of that she wore a very fitted brown leather corset, and down the front of it we had these laser cut leaves. I'm quite fond of layering fabrics so you get a glint of something else, and particularly on the elves I wanted them to have a slight magical feeling where you kind of go, whoa, what is that exactly?